Thank you. Can you put up my presentation, please?
Есть какие-то проблемы?
Okay, thank you. Yes, it's okay, thank you. Okay. It's not on the... Oh, yes, it is, yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. Thank you for asking me to speak here today. And what I'd like to do is to present a little bit how the bank views forestry in the Europe and Central Asia region as a whole, the problems that the forestry sector is facing, and how the bank can provide support and assistance. The bank, somewhat arbitrarily, divides the world into 6 different regions. And within this region of Europe and Central Asia, the bank cooperates with some 30 countries, which includes the Russian Federation, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, the Caucasus, the Central Asian republics, Turkey, and some of the countries in the Balkans, and some of the newly acceded states to the EU, such as Romania and Bulgaria. From the perspective of forest area, this is impressive, as because of mainly of Russia's contribution, it actually contributes to some 25% of the world's forests. If you compare it with the other regions in the World Bank, you can see that the ECA has the greatest forest cover, as 39% of the region is forested. But the good news doesn't stop here. It's not just that the total area is the largest, it's actually increasing. Over the last 20 years, the area has expanded by some 16 million hectares, and this is roughly the equivalent of Croatia and Hungary. If you look at this chart, this shows that, unfortunately, within this Europe and Central Asian region, the forest is actually not evenly distributed. On the left-hand side of the chart, you can see that the countries with most forests, like the Baltic states and Russia, which have more than 40% forest cover, and you go right the way down to the far end, with Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, with around 1 or 2% forest cover. And the problems in these countries with poor forest cover are very different to the problems that are being faced by the countries which have much more resources. Forest carbon growth is also increasing. The region stores something like 44 billion tons of carbon. And this graph also demonstrates that the growth of carbon stock is also continuing. Something like 3 billion tons of carbon were secured over the last 20-year period. But this, you need to put it into perspective. This sounds like a lot of carbon, and of course it is, but it is only equivalent of 7% of the emissions. As already heard today, the forestry sector also contributes to the GDP, and we estimate that the forestry sector generates something like employment for a little over 2 million people within the region. But in most of the ECA countries, forest sector only contributes between 1 and 1.5% GDP. But in the Baltic states and in Canada and Sweden, this percentage is much higher. So what are the reasons why other areas can't have an equally high contribution to GDP? If you could increase the contribution to GDP from 1 to 1.5 to, say, 2 to 3%, you could create an extra estimated 3 million jobs. So this then gives the sort of backdrop to how the bank sees the forest sector in Europe and Central Asia. Well, how then does this fit in with the bank's overall vision and objectives? Well, about a year ago, the bank had a new president appointed, and one of his first tasks was to help the bank prepare a new common and a new corporate objectives for the World Bank Group as a whole. And the two main themes for the World Bank now are ending extreme poverty and promoting shared prosperity. And the aim of the bank is to help reduce global extreme poverty rate to about 3% by 2030. The idea also is to increase shared prosperity, and that means increasing the income levels of the lowest 4% of the population. It's well recognized, though, that none of these goals can be achieved without a credible commitment to environmental sustainability and to urgent action on climate change. So within many of the ECA countries, it can be seen that the incidence of extreme poverty is not high in comparison to other parts of the world. So really, for the ECA for the Europe and Central Asia region, we need to concentrate on supporting income growth of the bottom 40%, addressing environmental sustainability, and working on climate change. So what then are the management challenges that we're facing? Unemployment in the Europe and Central Asia region ranges from as low as 5%, but in excess of 30% in some countries. It's common for many people in rural areas to seek job and education opportunities in towns or in other countries even. And this is leading to rural depopulation, or at least to aging of rural populations. When this happens, what tends to occur is that the land use starts to change. Areas which were traditionally agricultural pasture are becoming abandoned. These areas then grow tall, dry grasses, which then cure and present a significant fire hazard. Climate change is a considerable issue for the forest sector, and with climate change there's going to be increasing risks of fires. There's going to be increasing pests and disease. And the impacts are going to be different across the region, but certainly in most areas there is going to be the need for adaptation to climate change. How are species changing within your region? And forest fires, of course, contribute to climate change. Direct emissions from forest fires from Russia is estimated to amount to about 120 million tons of carbon dioxide annually. This is a significant amount. A key issue across the sector, and we've heard a bit about this today, is that poor governance, and poor governance is often as a result of poor policy, undermines sustainable economic growth. It undermines equity and forest conservation. And of course there's the changing situation due to external factors such as the EU Timber Regulation and the Lacey Act. Just to go back a little bit to the forest fires, something like 80 or 90% of forest fires are estimated to be caused by human beings. Well then this means, of course, that the forest fires can be prevented. So how do we work with the population to try and change the behaviours, stop agricultural burning? How do we get them to be more careful? And so one project where the bank is working together with Russia is the newly approved Forest Fire Response project. And this is going to look into the legislation and policy with specific reference to forest fires. There's going to be an education and awareness training campaign. There's going to be investments in fire detection, fire danger rating and preparedness systems. There will be training in firefighting. There will be investments in suppression and pre-suppression activities. And of course, by no means last, there will be a lot of equipment purchased to fight the forest fires. Okay, what then is the bank contributing overall to the sector? Well, regionally we have something like 20 active operations at the moment, and this includes 4 large forest sector loans, 5 technical assistance loans, trust funds from the European Commission and Sweden, work where the bank provides its own input and advice. And very often countries ask for advice from the bank because we can bring lessons that we've learned from other countries, and lessons that we've understand and seen what is working elsewhere, and bring them to other countries. We're currently working in some 17 countries, and the total value of the projects is nearly $300 million. The value of our closed projects amounts to a little under $1 billion. We have in the pipeline, that means projects that should be developed over the next 1 or 2 years, some $275 million worth of projects, including projects at the landscape level in Albania and Turkey, some GEF, that's the Global Environmental Facility support in Bosnia, and a new forestry development project in Belarus. What then are the sorts of areas where we can support? Well, I think that it's clear that getting appropriate policy and legislation and institutions in place is absolutely fundamental to help address some of the issues that you have been talking about today. The need to get an open and participatory policy that leads to good legislation and good forest institutions, which can create a level playing field, which creates like the enabling environment to allow private sector investment. This, of course, then leads into job creation and increasing value added for forest products in country. Other areas where we're working is particularly in these forest poor countries where you have local communities depending on the forest resources, working with community-based natural resource management. Other interesting areas where we're working in, as I mentioned, in Turkey and in Albania, is based on the landscape approach. You know, forest products aren't just the timber and non-timber forest products, but they include the water, the clean air, the carbon that it sequesters. And part of the idea is to work at a landscape level, to work at a watershed level, so that the forestry managers and the forestry owners who manage their resources sustainably, the benefits of that management then transfers down to the production of clean water, clean air. And the idea is to try and encourage the downstream beneficiaries to contribute to upstream management of the forest resources. We're also working in other areas with biodiversity protection and climate change mitigation and adaptation. Who are we working with? Well, the bank tries not to work alone. So we have good cooperation with the European Commission. We're working with the international NGOs of IUCN and WWF. But we also work with bilateral donors such as Sweden and Denmark, but also in increasingly partner countries. As I mentioned, we're undertaking what's called reimbursable advisory services in countries. Romania, for example, we're undertaking some work for them on trying to help them develop a climate change strategy. And this, Romania is paying for itself, but it's paying for it from the contributions from the EU support. We also work with the Global Environmental Facility, which supports environmental protection, it supports biodiversity, it tries to address land degradation, climate change, and also sustainable forest management. One area where we want to develop a bit more is cooperation with the private sector, and private sector investment from the World Bank Group is led through the International Finance Corporation. And we can undertake research work using a bank-managed multi-donor trust fund called Profor. So moving forward, where are we going? Well, we really like to continue working in the area of sustainable forest management. We want to develop working with climate-smart, improved landscape management. And we want to continue working in environmental management and climate action, and also attracting private sector investment. Okay, that's really then summarized the bank's approach to forestry in the Europe and Central Asia region. And it's really actually quite an exciting time for us because we're finding that interest is expanding, and it's an increasingly important area for us. And we're capable of helping the bank deliver goals, the development goals, while also helping to address climate change and environmental sustainability as well as economic development and sustainable forest management. So thank you very much.